Okay, this is a quick run through of splitting sessions. So I've imported an OMF into a template and also imported the reference movie and the reference audio associated with it and sunk it up. So I have this OMF and it's 12 tracks, and we see that below my template here between my which tracks I'm showing, my dialogue, VO, effects, some music tracks. Then I have A1 through 12 here, my OMF. First thing I like to do, because I always like to get back to, or have the ability to get back to the OMF that I received, basically the playlists of whatever I received. First thing I always do is duplicate a playlist of the original OMF. Do that by creating a group of the imported OMF files called OMF, and then just do a duplicate playlist, and you'll see everything will be labeled .01 after all these. So this is my second version of that, if you will. If I was feeling extremely anal, if you will, I would probably label this OMF1, OMF2, OMF3. I know in all my sessions, my structure has me saving the original playlist as the .01. So I'm not going to go and do that right now, but it's something that's pretty good to do if you're going to pass your sessions off to somebody else. I tend to finish my sessions that I start. So I'm going to go back to the original here. And there you go. So now I'm good with that. I have copies of all this. Now what I'm going to do is going to go through and split out the audio onto voiceover, dialogue, music, and effects tracks. And I'm splitting these out because these are what my delivery requirements are calling for. I'm going to need to provide separate splits and submixes, mix minus VO, M&E, mono dialogue, mono voiceover, full mix, things of that nature. So I'm going to have those go there. Now, fortunately, it looks like this editor was very conscious of track layout, and it looks like they split out a lot of stuff for me. That is not always the case by any means. So I'm going to start with music. Music's always easy to identify, generally, especially if something comes, if you're working on a show that uses library music, because they always have funky names, and often they have reference names for the files. So if we look here, reference names for these files, it's all music. You can kind of look and see. You know, obviously you can play things, but some things become kind of obvious after you've done this 2-3 times, if not your first time. So I'm going to take these, and my big thing is I want to make sure that two different items, two different sources aren't next to each other on the same track. I like to do what's called checkerboarding tracks, which is alternating tracks. It allows them to gives me greater freedom whenever I'm mixing. It allows me to do some reverb tails or extend and edit, things of that nature. If I'm looking at all these, it looks like these are all the same track. They've actually checkerboarded it for me, so this isn't the best example, but you get the idea. It's not too much work here. A very astute editor. Something like this, I wouldn't necessarily need. That's the same track anyway. What is that? That's 2 seconds and 17 frames. That's usually it. That's enough to not have to checkerboard. Go through here. We're still looking. All I'm doing is looking at my music tracks and looking at the names. You'll see things like this. This is the same track, 15994, and this one is also 15994. You'll see they performed an edit here, some kind of a crossfade. You can take it like that and listen to it and see what's going on, finesse it whenever you get to that point. I'm just going to work on the first act. It looks like this has a couple of different acts, and I can identify the acts by the fact that I have silence between, a good amount of silence between an area. Usually that's a whole number, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, depending on what network specs are. The network will tell them how much time, how much black, if you will, silence on the audio side to put between different acts. And visually it'll also include a slate. If you look, it'll probably tell you Act 2 is coming up. Sometimes it does that. Not all the time. So I'm just going to go and work on these particular tracks, Act 1 here. So I'm going to take this from this area all the way to the beginning because it looks like it's already checkerboarded for me, which is pretty crazy. Click on these guys, and then I'm going to move them up to my music tracks up here. So I'm going to do Control and then grab. Notice I've selected everything and I've gone to the grabber hand tool. If I press Control, what that will do is keep my clip or clips horizontally locked, meaning I can't go left or right, which is great because I don't want to go left or right if I'm trying to keep things in sync. So I moved out to my music tracks, and there you go. I've actually cleaned out a lot of tracks. Now, after I would do all of these, generally I would delete these tracks as I would go along. And then you might say, oh, geez, if you delete them, then you're not going to be able to get back to what you had. Well, let's pretend that I am. Let's pretend this is all checkerboard for the rest of these acts. And I move those up to my music tracks, okay? So let's pretend I just went and I did this. And now I have these 4 channels, these 4 tracks from my OMF where I have nothing. And if I delete those, I'm going to get the nice prompt of, if I go into track, delete, it's going to say, hey, tracks about to be deleted contain alternate playlists. Delete or keep those alternate playlists. Just to be mean, Pro Tools has the blue delete key as the return. And what that's going to do is delete those original playlists I have. So I don't want to do that. That is bad in my opinion. I'm going to say keep. What does that allow me to do? Well, I can go over here to any track. I can go on Effects 4 if I want. Look at my other playlists, and you'll see here, these are for my OMF. I can call up that music track. That's the music track. I can put this over here. If I look at these closer, that's those music tracks. You'll see it actually parallels what's here. It's the same thing. Because that's what playlists do. All they do is say, put this media here. Now, if I deleted the media would be gone, and that would be blue. I'd have the nice offline blue tracks. If I deleted the playlist, I wouldn't be able to get back to that. So I don't do that. So here I have all my music separated up there, and I deleted those tracks. Next one I'm going to do is I'm going to listen for, this show happens to have some narration. Depending on, file naming helps a lot. That's one of the really nice benefit of OMF AAF is file naming. You can see what things are, what they were called, which can help you split. You will know that something that says VO pickups is a VO pickup. It's probably narration. I'm going to turn off clip gain, viewing clip gain, because I don't want to mess it up. I don't want to accidentally grab something. So it looks like, let's give these a listen. You probably won't hear too well because it's coming out the speaker here. It's a little far away from the mic.
When it comes...
There you go.
If you don't know...
All VO. Now, what do we have here? Look at this. This looks like the same thing. It's something to be aware of. VO, voiceover, typically mono. If you're doing ADR, that might be 2 channels, mono, but it'll be 2 separate mics typically. Voiceover, different type of thing than production dialogue, different type of thing than interview dialogue, if you will. Usually 1 microphone. But sometimes you're going to get it as 2 tracks. So 2 tracks does not mean stereo. It doesn't mean that they're different per se. It could be what we call dual mono. It's the same thing on 2 channels. These guys are probably the same. I mean, I know they are, but they're the same thing. Even though it's a 1 and a 2 channel. Whenever I'm doing this, I don't need both channels. It's the same thing. So
when it comes to renovation,
a way for me to test and make sure that those are the same, I could stick a plug-in and do a phase invert, or I'm sorry, not phase, a polarity invert on one of the tracks versus the other, and watch them cancel, stick it in mono, so that the same sound is emitting out both speakers, and watch them cancel each other. So that's a good way to do that. What we'll do is go through here and see what these are. Is this all VO?
2.
Yes, it is.
You call it decadent, I call...
Some things are labeled differently. Notice how this is called 213. That is what they happen to name this voiceover, yet they went and they labeled these files VO pickups. So sometimes they're different. So you have to listen to some things. I know that these are all VO. I've actually gone through this show before, so instead of me just sitting here and doing this, I'll do that. I'll tell you. I'm going to take that whole thing. What did I just do there? I tap at the beginning, Shift, Option, Return. And Pro Tools Return will take you all the way back to the front, kind of a RTZ, a return to 0. Tab just took me to the next boundary. Shift, Return, well, Shift means highlight pretty much. So if I go Shift, Return, it'll take it, highlight all the way back there. Option in Pro Tools means backwards. Shift, Option, Return takes me from that point on till the end of the sequence, my last chunk. Do my Control Drag. I want to put this on my VO track. Same time, I'm going to get rid of those things that are redundant. These, remember, were the dual mono VO. I'm going to get rid of that. Why do I do this? The way I go about this is I look, and whenever I'm done with something, I get rid of it. And that lets me know how much more stuff I have to deal with. If I still see things there, then I could just know and remember that I did that and I don't need those files there. Or I can get rid of it. I have my playlist. Should I, for some reason, need to get it back? So there's nothing else on that track. So tracks 1 and 2 now are empty. And again, I can delete those, obviously being very conscious of this bad guy right there. So I'm going to keep. All right, if we go to the beginning, now I've got some other stuff. Something else I do that might be might be helpful is I have all of my output of all my VODME routing obviously going through a bus master, and I mute that so that I don't hear anything. I don't hear anything I've already split. The only place I hear stuff is whenever I import tracks, so that I hear what I got left. What do I have left to mix or to separate and split? And that's what I hear. I'm not hearing the music. I'm hearing somebody yell, ah. So that's what I'm doing there. I'm hearing that stuff. I'm not hearing the music. I know the music's good. I've moved it. So I'm going to take these kind of things right now. And I think I have, there's different ways you can go about things. What do we have here? If I turn on my show, I put on my movie, I solo this. Those could be considered sound effects, or they can be considered dialogue, part of the dialogue stem, because they are part of the show. They're part of the production dialogue.
First time, whoa.
Oh.
That's obviously dialogue because they're talking.
How'd you do it, bud?
That's obviously dialogue because they're talking. So something you need to decide before you split out a show and work on a show is how do they want to treat non-dialogue production audio, or so they things from sources. Do they want it to be considered dialogue as part of the dialogue stem, or do they want it to be considered as part of the effects stem? We have, given international distribution, sometimes people want things that are effects and not dialogue sensitive to be part of the effects, even though they're sourced from some kind of production, maybe a clip show or something of that nature. So it's up to your producer or you to have a conversation with your producer to see what you're going to do with that. I'm going to put these on dialogue just because that's what I'm going to do. What else do we have here?
It came over, but
Obviously dialogue. What is this stuff?
oh yeah.
Dialogue. Let's stick all that on dialogue. And we'll just do a couple more.
Or Shaq, to have your bon appetit.
Yeah.
This is bigger than my kitchen.
Okay, so we have this whole thing. So let's pretend I went through all these clips and they were all dialogue. Something to be aware of is, let's see, is this all the same thing?
Or puke.
Yep. Okay. So we'll just take all these and put those up on dialogue. Next thing we would do is go and look at effects. And effects are next, and we would split those and put those on my effects tracks. Now this show isn't too dense. There's not a whole lot. It's a very open show, very airy kind of music-driven show. Something to be aware of is the term checkerboarding, which is what we did here with the music. The same thing can happen with interview bites. Depending on your approach, if you're trying to minimize tracks, which we're often trying to do in television a lot of times, in non-scripted television, try to deal with a couple tracks, 4 to 8 dialogue tracks. So you don't necessarily always want to have one track for everybody, for each person. Sometimes you need to share tracks. And then what we do is we automate processing like EQs and compressors whenever we're mixing. To that end, you would often checkerboard various people. Like I would go between dialogue 1 and 2 back and forth if I had interviews going back and forth from different people. It just makes the mixing process a little easy. In my opinion, it's how I was taught to keep things kind of consolidated. It also keeps your footprint on your console a little tighter. So up to you what you want to do. What do we have here? Just some sound effects. It's good to see what's, stereo effects put on stereo tracks, maybe. Mono effects put on mono tracks, typically, obviously. Let's see if I can find an example. Here's something to be aware of. Look at this right here. This is a good example. So what do we have? We have 2 channels on an effect, and we're assuming you see 2 channels, you're thinking stereo. It's the same effect. You're thinking stereo. You're thinking, I'm going to move this up to my stereo track right here. But something kind of blatant right off of that, if I look back here, is that this on A5 is a significantly smaller amplitude than what's on A6. If I put these on a stereo track and I pan it left and right, my left side is going to be kind of non-existent while the right side is going to be emitting most of the sound. You got to be aware of that kind of stuff. Sometimes things that are 2-channel are not necessarily stereo. They may have been recorded poorly. They may just add a bad patch somewhere. They just might not be stereo. 2 channels does not always mean stereo. You got to use your ears if you're going to pan things. So be aware. Pay attention to the detail. So this I would not put on 2 channels. Let's stick it on a mono. What is this, a cash register? Or a beep? Same sound. This one's just significantly lower. I don't need this. I'm going to put this up here. It's the same sound. I get that sound there. Why do I need to hear that? I'm going to crank that up to hear it. And it's, do clip gain or whatever. And it's the same sound as this. So I'm just going to get rid of those. Now some things are going to be stereo and you're going to want to keep them that way. Whoosh. Here we go. Look at this. This is nice and even. Probably some kind of stereo characteristics. That's great. Let's put that on a stereo track. All right. Finally, one other thing you got to be aware of. Whenever you're moving stuff to stereo tracks, a lot of times Pro Tools, I don't know why, but it'll do this. You see what happened to my pans? They went, as part of the OMF, which is great. It provides pan information. But sometimes it screws up the pan information, too, if you move things to stereo tracks, because it's combining pan information. So what it did is it took the whole left channel and stuck it in the center. How silly is that? And what did it do on the right? Did it do the same thing on the, looks like it did the same thing on the right. Sometimes it'll do it for the left side and not the right. Oh yeah, like look here. This is the right side, but if I go to the left side, oh, that's actually okay there. So I don't know. So look how temperamental that is. So what you have to do is pay attention to detail. Make sure you're not mixing stuff in mono. You're sitting there with stereo, you think you have stereo music and you end up mixing and acting like crap. That whole thing was in mono. Oops. I better pan those out and go back and readdress that. So be aware of that. Essentially, what would I do here? I get rid of this panning. It's stereo music. And get rid of this. I don't know what that's there for. All right, so those are some hits. That's a brief description of splitting and things to be aware of.